It has been nearly a week since Hamas militants launched an attack on Israel, sparking retaliation. Over 2,000 people have died in 6 days and nearly 500,000 people have been displaced. Israel's defense forces have ordered all civilians of Gaza City, which amounts to more than 1 million people, to relocate within 24 hours. The UN has said such a mass relocation is impossible and warned that it could turn what is already a tragedy into a calamity. Here's a report. The Israeli retaliation following Hamas's surprise Saturday attack continues. Dozens of Israeli military planes pounded northern Gaza overnight, hitting as many as 750 targets. Hamas has claimed that the latest bombardment in the Gaza Strip has killed 13 hostages, which includes foreigners. Israel has not confirmed the attack. The Netanyahu government has already given an ultimatum to United Nations, asking them to evacuate Gaza Strip within 24 hours. The Israeli army is preparing for a ground invasion. The UN warns that mass relocation of Gaza civilians is impossible and could have devastating consequences.
Gaza will not look the same. We will reach a situation where Gaza leaders will be badly beaten. We will dismantle them. And whoever stays there will fully understand that you don't do such a thing to the state of Israel.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in the region trying to avoid a wider escalation of the conflict. He met Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. He has already met Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and is likely to meet leaders from neighboring countries. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has landed in Tel Aviv as well in a hastily arranged trip. He was in Brussels in the last couple of days. Operation Ajay to bring back Indian citizens from Israel has begun. The External Affairs Ministry, in its first official statement, reiterated India's consistent position that it supports establishing an independent and viable Palestine. However, it condemned the Hamas strike as a terror attack.
See this as a terrorist attack. Our policy in this regard has been long-standing and consistent. India has always advocated the resumption of direct negotiations towards establishing a sovereign, independent and viable state of Palestine, living within secure and recognized borders, side by side, at peace with Israel.
As Israel prepares for a ground invasion into Gaza, the search for survivors under the rubble continues. The airstrikes have made it difficult for families to reach cemeteries. Israel says there will be no pause in its siege of Gaza until all hostages were freed. More than 2 million residents of Gaza are currently living without electricity, fuel and water. With agency inputs and Radhika Udas, this is Parikshit Luthara. To take this forward, we're now joined by Jonah Blank, foreign policy expert and former policy advisor to US President Joe Biden, and Casey Singh, former diplomat. Ambassador Casey Singh, let me begin by asking you about what the CEO of JP Morgan noted earlier today. And he said, and I quote, "The world may be grappling with the most dangerous periods in decades following recent attacks in Israel." How do you think this complicates the geopolitical situation, especially after the 2-year-long and still raging Ukraine-Russia war?
Look, I think Americans have given, in the short run, the green flag to Israel to retaliate. But they're also concerned because they keep talking of rules of war. And then Secretary of State Blinken is, I think, making a last-ditch effort to see if countries which have influence on Hamas can get at least the those people who are being held up, the hostages, released. That may grant a short period. But then Israel is saying that they want to decapitate the Hamas movement, which means even if they get the hostages back, they're not going to stop from the invasion. And very clearly, when they've asked the northern part of Gaza Strip to be vacated, they are creating a partitioning there so that they can divide it. And then it's much easier to conduct your operations when you have half the country and you know what to focus on. You can surround that area and then do the cleanup. But the cleanup, most experts globally are saying, is not going to be that easy. Even the Economist magazine today, which has come out, has essentially said that Israel should not be comparing this to ISIS. Israel should think of what happened after 9/11. The Americans went to Afghanistan and then to Iraq, and then it was endless war. So these things have a way of, and today there were massive demonstrations in Jordan, in Yemen, and of course in Tehran. They were supported by the regime. They had to be massive. We're also seeing a strange feature in US and in the West where support is coming out from unforeseen quarters, students, university students, not just the Muslim community. And that's causing a degree of polarization, which is, I think, of concern in US and in other places. Today, there's a relative of a Chinese diplomat who was attacked by a knife in Beijing. Now, that is very peculiar, something like that happening in China. So this is as yet for starters. And there is some information that probably the foreign minister of Iran may have landed in Beirut. So that is obviously for consultations with Hezbollah, because that is what can widen the conflict. And the Iranians have reacted negatively to the airports of Syria being attacked. So it's widened a bit as it is, but the US is trying to use their huge naval presence to act as a deterrent and to hope that no other actors come in. But at the same time, they'll have to control Israel after a bit if you find that the mayhem that is bound to happen and the death of civilians will start turning the global public opinion against Israel.
Right, constraining and stopping a wider conflict and also reducing the number of civilian casualties is a priority for the US as well. Jonah Blank, thanks for being on the program. There is an official who heads hostage affairs in the US government, also accompanying Secretary Blinken as he moves around the Middle East right now. He was there in Israel as well. Do you think at some stage the US would try and understand what are Hamas's larger goals? It is being widely speculated that it had something to do with the IMEC corridor. It was about Israel-Saudi normalization of ties, something that was not acceptable to the Hamas. They wanted to push back on the peace process. But do you think the US would try and understand what the larger goals are in order to somehow end the conflict as well?
Thank you for having me, Parikshit. I think that Hamas's larger goals are not anything that the U.S. is going to be able to engineer. Hamas's larger goal is the elimination of Israel. It's been very clear about that ever since its founding document. Why the attack happened now may well have something to do with the Saudi-Israel normalization, but ultimately, once Hamas engaged in such over-the-top acts of terrorism, it almost made inevitable a very strong and decisive military response. However, President Biden was very clear, and I think correct, in warning that Israel must remain within the laws of war, as Ambassador Singh has rightly noted. That isn't just a matter of morality. It is a matter of morality, but it's not just that. It's also the only effective way of winning a conflict.
Right. Ambassador K.C. Singh, returning to you, Israel has ordered the evacuation of civilians from Gaza. It has told the UN we want 1.1 million people to evacuate within 24 hours. UN has warned of devastating consequences. Countries are saying that it could be a catastrophe if that were to happen. Do you think US would be able to use its good offices with Israel to, in a way, make them modify or resign the order, or there is no stopping Israel right now?
It appears that Israel is not going to be listening to anyone, not even the US at the moment, because their feelings are so aroused and they're so angry. But what is important is that even the Egyptians are sitting quietly. There are conflicting reports that they've not tried to get the exit routes opened or a humanitarian corridor to be open. Of course, the Israelis themselves have bombed out that particular exit to the south of Gaza. It's possible that once this population starts moving, quite a bit of the civilian, I don't think all million can or will move or have the capacity to move. Many of them may not have cars, may not have any way of traveling down there. And you're talking of 20, 30 miles of travel. So large number will be left. Some may not like to leave their homes or some members of the family may stay and the women and children may be sent out. Maybe once there is a little transfer of population, then the southern route might be open, because then Israel would have cordoned off the north from the south. I think they're trying to sift the women and the children and the older folks who are not fighters and not likely to be Hamas members. Once they are separated, because Israelis will insert themselves in the middle from the fighters on the north, then they may allow Egyptians to open the humanitarian corridor. But that may take a few days. I don't think it's going to happen instantly. What at best can be achieved is Israel might give another 24 hours, because UN has said it cannot be done in 24 hours. And I don't think it'll be sensible of Israel to ignore that and say, we don't care, we're going to go ahead. That, I think Americans will quietly work on them. Probably they don't want to give too much time, because they think then the fighters may move. There is also talk that Hamas is telling people not to move. They may be holding them up, not allowing the cars to go. So it's rather complicated. But I think Israel, by doing that, are absolving themselves of the blame that, look, we told the civilians to get out of the way. If they hadn't or couldn't get out of the way, then it is war and there's nothing we can do about it.
Right, that is an important point. They are trying to go by the book, saying that we asked everyone to evacuate. Jonah Blank, coming to you. Lloyd Austin, the U.S. Defense Secretary, has sent a message to Israel saying that we have your back in this war right now. But what does the U.S. stand to lose? What does the Biden administration stand to lose currently with what's happening between Israel and Hamas?
Well, the U.S. stands to lose a great deal, not only in terms of U.S. citizens who are among the hostages being held by Hamas, but also as this war expands, and it will expand. Israel appears very almost certain to be invading Gaza, which will be a very lengthy and bloody endeavor. The U.S. will inevitably be associated with that. So what the U.S. is providing is, among other things, ammunition and resupply, which the Israeli military will need, but also is providing a degree of international legitimacy. And Israel does need that, because if Israel were to simply launch an invasion along the lines of what Russia tried to do in Chechnya when it faced a very severe terrorism outbreak, it would make itself even more isolated among the world and among its allies in Europe and in Asia that it very desperately needs.
Right. The Gerald R. Ford, which is the largest carrier group of the United States, it has been deployed. Till where would the U.S. go in terms of supporting Israel with military, with arms and ammunition? They've already said they won't put boots on the ground. Jonah.
Yeah. I think it's very unlikely that we're going to see U.S. troops involved in any way in combat. That has never happened before in Israel, and it's almost inconceivable that it would happen now. However, the U.S. is very likely to provide munitions, resupply, parts, intelligence, and also to have its carrier group there as a warning to Hezbollah, to Iran, to Syria, to any other actors that might choose this moment to launch an attack of their own. I think that's the main utility, trying to keep this a one-front war for Israel.
Right.
And so far, at least, that appears to be succeeding.
Right. Okay, my final question to Ambassador K.C. Singh. Ambassador K.C. Singh, we first heard the Indian government, the Prime Minister, condemning the terror attack, saying that we support Israel wholeheartedly. There was also a message which came from the Ministry of External Affairs that they support the Palestinian cause and a two-state solution. Why do you think it is important for India to stick to this earlier stand of respecting and wanting a two-state solution?
Well, I noted then, and I wish the two had come together or very close to each other. Unfortunately, many days passed before the Ministry of External Affairs came out with it. Now, look at the situation where you have 6 or 7 million Indians living in the Islamic world, in the Gulf, and all the way up to Lebanon and so on and so forth. Now, if India is not seen as playing a very neutral role in all this, what if there are repercussions or impact on the life and liberty of these people living there, as we've seen in Beijing today, because the feelings are really aroused when the protests start, etc. If India is seen as taking sides with Israel, it's not good for a diaspora in the Gulf and West Asia. So I'm glad we rectified that, we rebalanced it, but it should have come very quickly, should have ideally come together rather than separately, because you can't separate one from the other. It's true, you have to condemn what's happened. It is terrorism, but at the same time, even US, even the other countries are putting it right at the bottom, but they do say that we are looking for a Palestinian solution of the Israel-Palestine question, because that is the only long-term solution. We'll get past the current standoff with a lot of bloodshed or less bloodshed, but there is no solution possible unless the Palestinian issue is addressed. And that is one of the things which has emerged, unfortunate as the horrible acts committed by Hamas are. But from their point of view, they put the Palestinian question back on the global agenda.
All right. Ambassador Casey Singh, Jonah Blank, thank you very much. We appreciate the fact that you joined us here in this time of global crisis right now. We are going to take a short break here on Global Eye, but don't go anywhere. We will be joined by Avi Meyer, Editor-in-Chief of the Jerusalem Post. Stay tuned.